Thanks to the biology department for putting this all together. It's a great opportunity for us to convene, in these times where we're disconnected and everything is digital. These are really exciting opportunities for us to kind of come together around important ideas, important speakers. And in doing so, in this disconnected, time that we're in, the importance of a land acknowledgement is really, really crucial. In some cases, these things are kind of tokenistic. We, say it without thinking, but these are ancient protocols of acknowledging where we're from, where we work, where we live, where we, collaborate. And so in that regard, we acknowledge that the University of Winnipeg is located on Treaty 1 territory. The original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and is the homeland of the Métis Nation. And as I said, these are ancient protocols, and we're talking about Treaty 1, but Brett is coming from a knowledge and a place of the West Coast. He's Gitxsan. And I've had the great pleasure of getting to be on the West Coast. And, when you go to another territory by canoe, you don't even touch the land unless you acknowledge the land and ask permission to be there. And I think Brett's going to teach us a lot today about what that means. He's a Gitxsan author and artist. So that's the Northwest Interior of BC. He has a passion for his culture, land, politics, and his people, and a desire to share these stories and knowledges. He's the award-winning mother of the Gitxsan series, which he'll talk more about, I'm sure. His first book in that series, The Sockeye Mother, is the winner of the Science Writers and Communicators Book Award from 2017, which is pretty neat because Brett's work fuses Indigenous knowledge from the Gitxsan area with science in a really, really innovative and important way. He's got a background in film and television and media production. He worked for years at APTN. He's helped with the Sockeye Festival and many other cultural activities. And we are very fortunate to have Brett Huson as a core team member at the Prairie Climate Center. And so it's great that he's here today to share with us his presentation, The Land as Pedagogy and Natural Law. So thank you, Brett, for being here, and take it away.
Hetchum sketchwa lachsin tishwid kalhuxwi, wib good genuchwil sawitwi. I'd just like to thank all of you for being with me this afternoon. My name is Hetchum Get, but you can call me Brett because that's what's on my government ID. Today, I wanted to take a delve into the world around us from the perspective of a Gitxsan person. I want to share with you some of the key and important pieces of knowledge that are about the land, how we learn from the lands we reside in, and how natural law is already set out before us. But first, I wanted to take it back. In the beginning, there was much darkness, no air, no earth, no water, no fire. The silence was so deafening, even your own thoughts would be too loud. It was in a moment such as this where Creator's conscience sparked the first fire. Out of this fire came all that would build our existence. This is a story of the beginning as my people perceive it to be. In our mind, we hypothesize that the universe came to be because of Creator's first thought. And you can't prove me wrong. But what you can do is take a step back and forget the singular perspective that you've been told to accept and begin to think of all the things that are familiar about this version of the beginning. This story sounds very familiar to some of you, and you may have already made this comparison, but it parallels the Big Bang. Both are theories, and when you see each from the perspective of those who live in each storyline respectively, you will see that there are ways that we can provide strong evidence of each plausible way of knowing. So what can we take away from all of this? There is a pluriverse of perspectives that exist in the world. These ways of knowing each carry understandings of a universe around us. If you take away the politics, if you take away the industrialization, consumerism, and everything else that allows us, and just break it down to the bare bones, what you get is our Mother Earth. Even our existential understanding of the universe comes from what we learned about the earth itself. So why then has humanity removed itself so much from the home that allows us to exist? While we have all continued breathing clean air, drinking the fresh water, and depending on the health of millions of other species, the industrialized consumer-based people have decimated most of the globe's forests and continue to commodify resources to justify extracting it, just so we can satisfy our consumer-based lifestyle that we've all become accustomed to. When my grandparents were born, the salmon populations were already being depleted in spite of the efforts our people were making to protest commercial fishing. Today, the population of salmon has been crushed into critical levels. My nation could never have fathomed that we would ever see such a drop in the populations. I remember my grandfather speaking to me about how the salmon runs would be so thick with the number of salmon that you could walk across their backs at narrow canyons. Commercial fishing took off in the West around the era of the Depression, about 1919. We kept trying to appeal to the government, but our perspectives on land management fell onto deaf ears because we were still not considered human beings. Even to this day, our knowledges of the land are not considered or accepted by most people outside of our nations as valuable forms of information. My nation and many other nations that live on these lands have the longest track records of sustainable living in the history of the lands we're living on. For well beyond the 15,000-year mark, the Gitxsan people have thrived and enjoyed the splendor of our territories. Gitxsan stories take us back through multiple cycles of the last glaciation period. Even the spirit bear, as it's known to the settlers, is there to serve as a reminder of the lives that we lived when the ice touched our homelands. This bear is a genetic anomaly to science because it's not an albino, but a white-furred black bear that exists only on the territories of our peoples. For us, we know why this bear exists. Now back to these salmon. I started writing about salmon because this keystone species is one of the cornerstones to the Gitxsan life cycle, and not only determines the health outcomes of our nation, but also determines the existence of everything along the River of Mists. This is known as the Skeena River to settlers. Its real name is Gitxsan. So the name of our people, the Gitxsan, translates to the people of the River of Mists. We held ceremonies and celebrated the change in seasons by celebrating the return of the salmon from the oceans. We celebrated these moments because we knew it would mean our world could exist as it does for another season. Our understanding of the impacts the salmon had on our ecosystem comes from tens of thousands of years of monitoring the populations, watching which species would come and go during different parts of the year, and also by witnessing how the land flourished with every decomposing salmon body. We knew that they fed the lands. We would observe how every aspect of the flora and fauna were interconnected in such a way that it was a perfect balance to provide all living beings with life. We revered the salmon as equals, as being a part of our Mother Earth. We have stories to talk about how mistreating the salmon people would bring dire consequences if we were not to heed the natural laws. This is one of the key differences within the Gitxsan ways of knowing that is different to how modern societies tend to view the world. When we are born, we begin life in only our skin. We grow, we borrow, as we grow, we borrow from the earth to help us grow, to keep us warm, and to learn from. Gitxsan people believe that we are part of the land, not separate. This is natural law. Every member of Gitxsan society has what we call Gitxsan. These are our treasures, our inherent rights that are both real and not real, handed down from generation to generation, held in perpetuity and never extinguished. Gitxsan is so much. We are such wealthy people to have so much that the earth has to offer. One part of our Gitxsan is our yoke, or our laws. These laws are not based off of man's interpretation of justice. Our laws are natural laws, laws that already existed long before we arrived on earth. As we go through different stages of life, it is up to our maternal uncles and aunts to begin teaching us about our world and how we must conduct ourselves in this world. This is what we call our yutlamach, our teachings. If one of our members shows great promise in understanding, let's say, animals or behaviors of animals, then they will attain yutlamach from a member of the house group that is a specialist in that field. Yutlamach is basically, you could say, our education, or what we are shown and how we are shown to protect the land and the resources that are being used. It takes a lifetime of learning from our yutlamach to understand what it is to be Gitxsan. We learn from the land, and the land is our curriculum. So we spend this time learning over our whole lifetime. Myself, I still spend time learning from the elders that I have left, from my parents. And Yushalmach is not just one particular area of study. As a Gitxsan person, you have to understand every aspect of the world around you. You don't just spend time on the minuscule things. You have to understand the big picture, because everything is connected. No matter what you do, whatever you do, it is still all connected, and it's all connected to the survival of the human species. So that's where we spend our time, is on the land. We learn from it. It tells us what it needs, and it tells us how we have to live to continue to be able to live on it. By the time I was 12 years old, I already had an understanding of how the salmon's life cycle worked. I also remember back when we had a lot of biologists hanging around in our communities. They were always paying attention to what we were saying, but they would never credit us with teaching them. Even before I was born, my mom remembers one of my grandfathers saying, "We don't need biologists to tell us about our lands. We have our own biologists. We know how this world works." And then when we would see the studies being published, the only bits of new information we learned from them was that the salmon were bringing in marine-derived nitrogen, and this was being disseminated through the mycorrhizal fungi. This idea of salmon feeding the land wasn't new to us. We just didn't know the name of the particular species that were helping. But even the fungi themselves, we were aware of because we use roots in a lot of our daily life. And every time that we would dig up the roots, we would see a lot of the ectomycorrhizal fungi encasing the roots. So we understood that it was there. We just didn't know that's what was connecting everything. But we understood this connection. So there wasn't really much we learned from this study. In fact, a lot of stuff that was placed into these studies tended to come from us. We have always viewed the earth as a complete living being, and that when we do something to one part of the land, it would very well impact another part. So although it is amazing to get a microbiological understanding of how the land works or how it operates, it didn't change how we behave with the land, because we were already behaving how we needed to. But these studies should have changed how Western societies behaved. So when you are exploring the stories from Indigenous communities, it may be best to truly take a deep dive and spend some time with storytellers and knowledge keepers to grasp the understanding of the lands that you're living on. Instead of trying to utilize the multitude of sciences to only benefit humanity, why not treat your education systems like the Gitxsan Yushlamach? Why not consider your own Gwashliainst? You have to understand the Gwashliainst of the lands that you're residing on. So again, what Gwashliainst is your inherent rights and responsibilities to the lands that you live on. You have a responsibility to understand that land and to follow those natural laws. That's the only way that you'll survive. And this is one of the things that we saw the first time we encountered new settlers. In our words, we would call the settlers tzatzawat, outsiders. And tzatzawat doesn't mean that you can't feel at home on these lands. It just means that you now have to make an effort to change your perspectives on your place in this earth. When you change your conduct in life and move toward connecting with the land more often, then you will also begin to see that you feel less lonely. You'll become more at home, and you may even gain some new family along the way. You know, these stories that we share, a lot of them are very related to everything that happens within our ecosystem, and also things that we encountered in our past. There was once a great city of our nation. This city was called Dem Lahamed. Dem Lahamed existed in a time where we were progressing, we were growing, we began to use a lot of resources. And there's a particular house group that carries the story. They can tell you in more detail. They're the ones that are the protectors of the story. I can only give you the gist of what the story is, but that's how we do it. Everyone that carries a name, those names belong to the land. When we're given a name, like my name, Hetkun's Get, it's not a name that belongs to me. It's a name that comes from the land. I'm just a holder of that name. So our language is directly tied to the lands. So when we look at the names, in particular, one of the Wilps, their chief's name is Tibasa. And Tibasa is the one-horned mountain goat. And in our story, the one-horned mountain goat saw how our people were mistreating the goats as well as all the resources on the land. And during the time with Dem Lahamed, Tibasa, the great one-horned mountain goat, flicked parts of the mountain onto the people down below and almost wiped out everybody. But when you look at this story, you know, the first people who were translating our language were Jesuit priests. So they tend to mythologize everything, and they compared it to, I don't know, like the stories that come from the Bible. They changed the terms that we have for energy, and they called it spirit because they didn't understand the concepts that the way that we understood the land. And so in the translation, you don't get the meaning of that. So that story of the great one-horned mountain goat, it commemorates a time of a great landslide. It commemorates a time when we overlogged a side of a mountain near our village. And because of that, the land became weak and the roots weren't holding the land up anymore. So it wiped out the city. And afterward, our people separated. They moved into the 3 different nations that now live along Gitxsan. There's the Gitxsan people, the Nisqa, and the Gitxsan. The Gitxsan and the Nisqa were a part of that great city, and everyone had over time uh, learned to eventually be apart. We had trade up and down the Skeena River, or Gitxsan. We went up and down the river in the winters with our dogs, our sleds. We traded for coastal foods with inland foods. We had an economy, and our economy was based off of natural law. It had nothing to do with trying to progress man. We learned from that. We learned how we had to change. And we understood that we can't live that way of life because it's not going to sustain our people. So that change happened over a few hundred years. And for that rest of that period, for the next 14,000 years, we lived in that better way. We lived in trade. We lived in an economy that was based off of what we gave back to the land. And every one of our house group members, wealth wasn't like how much we retained. It was how much we give. So when we have ceremonies, when we have big feasts, the house groups and the chiefs, the people, they try to outgive each other. So if you go to a feast, the object of the feast is not to show how much you're holding, but how much you can give. And this way of giving, it went into every aspect of life. It wasn't just, giving to another human. It was giving back to the earth as well. So in our land management practices, we did things like controlled burns. We would monitor population of species, all the ungulates, all of the fish, even the insects. We had an understanding of the stars that will allow us to navigate through our territories, but also to determine the changes in the weather and how it's going to affect populations. So we had these understandings of our whole ecosystem. And that's the only way you survive on the coast. Right now, if you were to take away all of the infrastructure that exists along the West Coast, it is a very harsh environment. You always have people who try to be survivalists. They come up into the territories, they even go up into Alaska, and they think because they've read a few books and went camping a few times, they could survive, and they end up perishing. That happens frequently in our territory. We actually have that usually once a year, we'll find someone who's from the States or from somewhere else in Canada that has gone missing or has perished on a survival trip. But it's an unforgiving place. But if you truly live as a group of people, and if you give back as much as you take, then you will forever be looked after. And this goes for any territory. You can't keep taking and you can't keep consuming without returning everything that you're taking. That's how existence exists. That's how the world operates. There's nothing that will change that. You can do all the studies you want and try to say this is the safe amount to remove. We know the population. We can harvest this many animals, this many fish. We can cut this many trees down. No human study will ever determine that. No human study will ever tell us how much we can take. That's the biggest mistake that people have. The biggest mistake the governments have. And that's one of the things that we need to change overall as society, is to just understand that we need to give back. If we want to continue existing as we do on this planet, we have to give back. And it's not for us, it's for our kids. So those are the things that come from Yushlamach, your teachings. And those are the things, those ideas are your guahiens. Those are your inherent responsibilities as people who now live on these lands. Those are the things that you have to carry with you and remember. And that will always provide you in life. Sure, you can live out your life in the human world, segregated from the earth, living in the cities only. but you're not considering the future generations. You're only considering yourself. So to be a true humanitarian, to be a true person of the world, of the land, think about the generations ahead and think about how much you give to the land. And, you know, before I leave the stories, before I leave this presentation before I come to an end, as they say, I don't like to say end, but as I leave you, let me share a little bit about our reverence for Kak, the raven. Raven is highly intelligent and very mischievous. We immortalized Kak as the being we get. We get the Wanderer is a shape-shifting raven who is our accidental creator. And what I mean by that is you listen to the stories of We Get and how We Get brought aspects of our world into being. And we don't think of We Get as like the creator. For us, creator isn't a personified being. It's existence, it's energy. That's what creator is, just energy. And We Get was very mischievous in all that he did. But all of these stories about We Get carry truths. So if you look at the nature of blackbirds, you begin to see their hoarding nature. You see how they continually pile up carcasses that they find, or meat, or seeds. They spread them all over the range that they travel. And they tend to forget most of it. They probably forget like 80% of what they buried or left. So all of this storing and hoarding and forgetting where they put stuff tended to create more biodiversity. Just the same as any birds eating and their droppings, and bears and their droppings. Like, those are the things that we talk about in our stories. So instead of looking at the translations that Jesuit priests gave to our stories, spend time with the storytellers to learn the true meanings behind all of that. Learn about how the environment works, and that might make your explorations into whatever you're doing much easier. And that might cut down a lot of time in wasting time on the things that you don't really need to study, and then you can focus on other finer parts of existence. And those are the things that we always have to remember about Indigenous ways of knowing. I want you to remember that all of our ways of knowing have survived us longer than any empires, long before there were pyramids, long before there was anything that you see in man's written history books. That's how we existed with our ways of knowing. And myself, I am Gitxsan, and I'm always going to be Gitxsan. The government has no say. They can't give me a number like they try to, or tell me how Indigenous I am. There's no such thing as blood quantum in how Gitxsan you're going to be, because I come from the land, and I will always protect that land. And that land, in turn, will always protect me. Because the land is my mother, and we are a matrilineal society, the Gitxsan people. And we will always protect our mothers, because we are nothing without our mothers. We do not come into this world without our mothers. So I kind of want to leave it there, because it is a lot of information to take in. So Amayad, thank you for allowing me to share a little bit about our perspectives and our ways of being. And I really appreciate everything that you have felt along the way, everything that you might have thought of, everything you may have been offended by, everything that you may have been enlightened by, everything that may have made you happy. Those are the things that come with every story, and those are the things that you have to keep in mind those feelings, you feel them for a reason. And instead of putting those feelings onto people, try to explore why you have those feelings. That's getting to know yourself better and getting to know the land better. And yeah, it would give us a little more time now for questions than we had before. So again, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity.